Hello, everybody. I'm Alok Tayal, Managing Partner of Fulden Company, and I would like to welcome everyone who has taken the time to join us today for discussion on decoding the role of AI in private equity. We are thrilled to have attendees from all around the world, actually. This is exciting from, I think, 4 or 5 continents we have people joining in. Increasingly, we are seeing our PE and IB clients make use AI a lot more to make informed decisions across various stages of the deal life cycle. New AI tools and technologies have emerged, enabling efficiencies and accuracies never seen before. Today, we are joined by our esteemed panelist, Andrew Dicko, Managing Director at Greenwich Capital, Mark Gartner, Managing Director, Investment Development at RLH Equity Partners, and John Swallows, Managing Director and Head of Research at Skybridge. Our panelists will provide their first-hand observation, and on top of that, their experience, their point of view, and also what kind of future expectations they have from AI. We will also explore the impact of AI on their current businesses and also on their portfolio companies. I would like to thank all of our esteemed panelists for sharing their thoughts. And without further ado, I hand over to our moderator, Fulden's VP of Strategy and Research, Nilesh Sharma. Nilesh, over to you.
Thank you, Alok. Hello, and a warm welcome to everyone. Thank you for joining in on this beautiful Wednesday morning. Before I start, just a couple of housekeeping items to go through. This webinar is being recorded, and we will be circulating the link to the recording to all the attendees and the panelists. For the attendees especially, if you have any questions, please type them in the chat box, and we will try to get them to our esteemed panelists, time permitting. Now let's begin this. Andrew, let me start with you, because I know this is a subject very close to your heart, and you recently wrote a paper on it. Has artificial intelligence started impacting deal activity in any form, particularly in the middle market space?
Yeah, I certainly think it has. The two areas that I've seen it probably impacted the most is for us on the investment banking side is one on the just general data analysis side. There's proliferation of tools that can allow you to sift through a lot of information, both public and your own data, to identify acquisition targets and align on what a company's strategic initiatives are. One of the more interesting and exciting things for me has been some of these tools for automated document review, particularly on the legal side, as well as financial due diligence. So just AI-powered platforms that can help scan, categorize, analyze thousands of documents is really exciting to see. In the future, I think you're going to see more of a proliferation of AI deeper into financial modeling and forecasting as well. And so I'm seeing a little bit of it today. There's a ChatGPT plugin for Google Sheets and things of that nature. I think that's still in its infancy, but you're definitely seeing it overall.
Right. Mark, let me come to you. Like Andrew mentioned, it has, at least in the nascent form, started impacting certain parts of the deal life cycle. But where do you see this impact being more prominent on the deal life cycle?
Yeah, it's a good question. And maybe I'll just start with the introductory comments that AI, or even .ai, is one of the acronyms of the year. It kind of reminds me of when everything became a tech-enabled service, or everything became, as a service. There's valuation benefits associated with that acronym. And so everything's going to be .ai for some amount of time, which does make things a bit more challenging because it certainly catches the investor's attention. There's a lot of great tailwinds behind artificial intelligence, clearly, but it then does require more investigation around, what actually is going on there. Is there true AI going on? Are people grabbing on to that terminology because they think it's going to enhance the appeal of their business? And so one of the things we have to pay more attention to as investors is there something truly differentiated or proprietary there? Or are they using things that are, say, off the shelf and perhaps more commoditized at this stage? So there's a lot of enthusiasm around it, and it's been fun to see this unfold.
John, I'm sure your experience is not very different from what Andrew and Mark have described, but you also kind of bring in a slightly different perspective, being in the secondary market as well. What are your thoughts on how this thing is panning out?
I have been in the public and secondary markets in private and public equity for a long time and lived through, multiple technology transitions. And this one looks to me like the internet very early, where I think we can have the most confidence in the infrastructure build at the lowest level, hardware and data centers, and there will be bottlenecks that appear. Standards will be rewritten, packaging technologies will emerge, lots of different things will happen because of the sheer force of this, which seems to have, strong fundamental underpinning. And then the further up you move from that lower level, the more uncertain you get, to the point where we're waiting to hear what Google's going to produce with its, next generation large language model, which I think is called Gemini. Could there be leapfrogging of the technology from the very biggest players that sort of resets everything again? And then at the higher level, the application level, especially for privates that have been investing in some form of business model over the last 5 to 10 years, the technology is potentially disruptive in many cases. And you look at some of them and say, this is in the crosshairs of AI, or it needs to be, totally reimagined in the context of AI. And then I agree with Mark, everybody who has any product will try to attach the AI, enthusiasm to it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Mark, let me ask you this, because this is a question that we do get asked a lot by clients, particularly in the private equity space. Our buyers, and I mean both financial as well as strategic buyers, are they getting anxious about the companies that they're acquiring right now? What impact will AI have on their portfolio companies, let's say 3, 5, 7 years down the line?
Yeah, I mean, I would say there's a fine line between anxiety and enthusiasm. I mean, insofar as, our strategy is predicated on investing behind strong organic growth potential. I think AI is the most exciting megatrend, since, say, digital transformation, whenever that officially started. And so I suppose any anxieties that I'd be feeling right now would be centered around overpaying, in the current era. And then, maybe on top of that, this world seems to be moving so quickly. The pace of innovation is so rapid. I suppose the other anxiety would be around not keeping up, with all of the change. My fear in participating in this panel is that, after my next breath, what I'm saying is obsolete. So that's how I'd kind of respond to that.
Yeah, Andrew, I mean, you've sold companies to private equity firms, and you continue to do that. Is that something that you get asked a lot when they're looking at making these investments? Are they, I mean, anxious perhaps is the wrong word, but are they considering this as an important factor driving their investment decision?
Yeah, I would echo some of Mark's sentiment, and even beyond companies that are AI centric, it's certainly something that is coming up more frequently with all transactions. I spent a lot of time on the consumer space as well, and for me, the conversation used to be, how could Amazon disrupt this company I'm about to buy and change its fundamental business model? How could a big box retailer come in and disrupt this business model? And today, the same questions are being asked with regard to AI. So it used to be underwriting their not only their historical performance and their go forward performance based on their financials, but how could AI disrupt this business that I'm buying? And how do I get as smart as I can to have confidence, conviction? And so it's really any business that we're selling today that is dependent on people, that's providing a service, that there's a service element, is really kind of, it's a new part of the underwriting process. But like Mark said, it's also, they might be buying a business and they may see an AI opportunity that the company hasn't explored yet, and it could actually be a value add and actually something that's additive that maybe the sellers haven't vetted or fully looked at. So it's definitely something that is front of mind, and is something that's being looked at much more deeply than it has in the past. It was frankly non-existent up until 12 months ago.
Sure. That's very interesting. John, you compared this to early days of the internet and how it has panned out, and now you can't literally do anything without being on the web. But no, when it comes to AI particularly, do you see this trend of firms making those investments internally in ramping up their technology infrastructure?
I think we're in the, I think definitely in the era when capital formation is going to be built around these very large market growth trajectories that are being published every day and at every layer, at the hardware layer, where there's going to be niche markets relating to standards changes that address bottlenecks between memory and the CPU, or the connection between different kinds of processor units, and then optics in silicon, for example. And there may be some startups that emerge and capture those markets and peripheral markets relating to the infrastructure that grow very rapidly into this market. And then at a higher layer, as occurred with software as a service, there will be problems that need to be solved with the deployment of applications on the platforms that mature, and new businesses will emerge there. And the application world is wide open. I don't think we have any idea, really, any more than we did when those other technologies emerged, what could come of this at the application level. And so, you take out the IDC reports about AI cloud services growing from $8 billion last year to $62 billion in 2027, and you just start to pencil out how you want exposure to that, and that's a brand new thing. And the VC world, moves rapidly towards those kinds of things.
Sure. And Andrew, you mentioned in your opening remarks about how firms are using AI-enabled tools and technology to source and manage deals. Could you perhaps elaborate on that? I mean, what kind of tools are you referring to? How's the process become, let's say, more efficient?
Yeah, I haven't seen a ton of it in the sourcing. The one platform that continues to come up, not only some of our competitors, is Grata, and so people are using that to get deal flow, and it allows you to get additional insights versus just like a book of leads or that type of thing. It uses algorithms, predictive learning to identify companies for new opportunities. So I'd say that's probably the biggest element. I'm sure you're going to see a significant amount of new opportunities coming. I even have some digital marketing agencies and companies reaching out to me for insights, and I can tell that they're kind of working on new kind of lead gen, source gen tools that I'm sure we'll be hearing about in the months to come. So it should be an interesting development.
Right. And Elias, can I comment on that too a little bit, just around kind of tools and whatnot? Yeah, I think people underestimate the role of the CRM. There's so much data that's going into the CRM. I think it's increasingly going to become the nerve center of all deal sourcing activity, probably fundraising as well. And I think when you look at the dashboarding, the visualizations, and what will ultimately become automation, it gets very exciting. And I think the biggest failing perhaps around deal origination is around the underuse of CRM, and that probably stems from the fact that you still have to input a lot of data. Someone has to do that. It's not fun to do. And so, there are CRM platforms that are starting to eliminate that need to the extent that that's possible. I think that's a big step forward. And any CRM platform that's not offering that capability of attempting to eliminate the data entry element is probably falling behind. If you look at the other platforms that we've now probably taken for granted, Source Scrub and PitchBook and those that offer tremendous value in the area of deal origination, there's increasing integrations with the CRM, which is very exciting, and ways to eliminate or reduce kind of the data entry problem that I mentioned earlier. Robotic process automation is something we've experimented with. Pick a laborious, repetitive task that someone doesn't want to do, and you can build bots to do that. We've experimented with that. I've been shocked. It's come in under budget, ahead of schedule, and it's actually relatively straightforward to do, and it saves hours of time. And all these things produce data. And I think what's really exciting is when you get to the interconnectedness of these platforms, not just one-to-one connectivity and one-to-one integrations, but the complete life cycle, the complete circle of interconnectedness across these data platforms. Because imagine a world when all the benefits of your activities and your data are talking to one another, and your system, let's say it's your CRM, can tell you when you come into work to maximize your chance of finding a good and gosh, maybe even differentiated deal. Call this person today.
Yeah.
And that's benefiting from, all sorts of data input. Or maybe let's say something in your CRM, maybe a top prospect, and maybe that top prospect's IP address visits your website. Think about if you could get real-time alerts, for that. There is tremendous potential in the arena of deal sourcing. I think the biggest challenge for people is they're underutilizing the capabilities.
Sure.
And
sure.
just to add to that, one of the we sold a company earlier this year called RXA Analytics. They do AI and BI support for companies, and one of the tools they use is Data Robot, which is a predictive analytics tool, and they have a team of 50 to 100 data scientists. And so in its initial stages, companies are able to leverage a platform like Data Robot, use predictive analytics, and then go into whatever your data platforms are. CRM is a fantastic example, and they can come in and deliver those insights. I think the real headway is going to become when companies can take ownership of that type of process to deliver their own insights versus having to use a third party to do it for them. But I see that as a significant new opportunity for everyone, and I've seen it in real time, and I've seen the value of it, and I saw what the buyer's value for was it as well. So it's really an interesting thing that I think we all are we're getting up to speed on, but it's proving to be very effective.
Sure. John, I noticed you smile and nod your head when Mark talked about underutilization of CRM data. I mean, is this a sentiment that you share?
One of the major pain points in all enterprise IT systems is the interaction of different silos of data, the reconciliation of the movement of data between different platforms, and then the great challenge of finding people who can provide advanced analytics. And sometimes you find that, there are teams of people who are doing things that are pretty, basic and, the kinds of things you would assume could be automated because of the challenges of getting various computer systems to talk with each other, right? I mean, the big SIs have huge businesses doing ETL transformations between these applications. So that seems like a natural place for AI. Once you can get to the point where you can ask intelligent questions about the data along the lines Mark's talking about, that's, obviously a really exciting application. I've heard of applications relating to industrial manufacturing where you have various sensors in different places along the line, in places you can't see, things you can't see where there aren't sensors, and the AI interpolates the data to give you basically virtual sensors along the way. And this just goes to the I think core premise that this technology is really substantially new, and significant in its potential, and where it's going is really hard to even fathom any more than it was way back with other, early stages and other transitions.
Right. Yeah, no, I mean, we've barely scratched the surface when it comes to this topic. We're talking only about sourcing, and the impact is huge. What about, the due diligence process? Again, Andrew, you talked about the ability to scan and tabulate certain documents, which otherwise would have been fairly, manual process, so to speak. Has this started impacting the due diligence process, commercial, financial?
Yeah, once again, I think we're in the second inning of this. I think the biggest example I have is almost any deal we have. If the buyer is underwriting it, they'll commence a commercial due diligence study with a group like Martech, and part of that study is a competitive benchmarking analysis. And now what I'm starting to see is, in addition to that competitive benchmarking, they've including kind of an in-depth analysis as to any early stage companies that could be providing a similar service that's leveraging AI or can be disruptive using AI to ensure there's no specific startup that is kind of has already launched and it could kind of make that business irrelevant or less relevant. And so it's a new work stream that's being included. Commercial diligence providers love it because they have something else to sell. And but it's been interesting to see that, and I'm sure there'll be more that pops up on our radar from buyers in particular. But that's one thing that I've seen a real life example in the last 6 months.
All right. Mark, is
Yeah,
that your
Nilesh,
experience as
I
well?
would. Oh, sorry. I was going to add to that. The thing that I've been most surprised by, and I don't think anyone's yet mentioned ChatGPT. It's pretty amazing. We're 21 minutes into this, and we're just getting to that. But I've been really impressed with investment risk assessment using ChatGPT. I didn't know how good it would be, and I think the name of the game right now is if you don't ask ChatGPT, you don't know, and so you got to experiment with these platforms. But there was a particular situation. We were looking at a deal. There was an issue that we deliberated on as a group for several weeks. It was a core due diligence issue and a very challenging one. And we ultimately proceeded with the transaction enthusiastically. We got comfortable with the issue. But after the fact, I said, I wonder what ChatGPT would have said about that issue. And in 30 seconds, it came to the same answer we got to as a group. After weeks of deliberation, and not only did it come to the same conclusion, it proposed strategic areas that the business might focus to mitigate that risk and sort of future-proof itself. Now, I'm not saying that ChatGPT or large language models are going to take the place of investment committees, but I think it would be probably prudent to consider using it as a tool alongside human investment decision-making. I mean, you can see a case where the investment memos of the future all have a what is ChatGPT, or what do the large language models think, about this investment. It was just remarkable how similar the conclusions were.
Yeah. No, the reason why I had not brought in ChatGPT so far is, my experience with it has been fairly limited, and it's largely has been through my daughter, who's 9, and just learning to ask ChatGPT some social studies questions when it comes to her homework. But I get your point. In certain areas, definitely, it's able to do things that otherwise would have taken weeks, if not months. But John, let me come to you. We're talking about this, and the theme that emerges is more on efficiency and on productivity side. Is that a key consideration, a driving factor behind increasing the usage of these tools?
I think Mark's point is really well taken. We're just discovering how to use them and when you can rely on them and where they're applicable. And there's a huge effort now to try to figure out how to circumscribe the data that they're trained on so that you can make sure that they're not going to hallucinate or provide misinformation or violate copyright laws. And there's early stage ongoing research relating to try to unpacking what the actual AI algorithm is doing, so you could have some confidence that it's not going to go sideways. When any of us asks it a question, and we see the answer, we're capable of evaluating whether it's credible. We sort of incorporate it into our thinking. We don't rely on it, and we're not directing it at an outside party who should rely on it. And that degree of competence, needs to be further developed.
Sure. Andrew, have you been using ChatGPT even remotely in your work?
Is that for me?
Yeah, that's for you.
Yeah, I would say when I look at the tools that we're using, I would say the number one tool I've used is ChatGPT, mostly because it says the least amount of friction. Right? It's the simplest. It's the one we're most comfortable with. It's chatting, and we've also started to dabble with some content creation. So we're creating a lot of marketing materials, documents, and there's tools like Jasper that are more targeted for business owners. With that said, I think there's a lot in our think tank right now. So, we're really trying to beta test some other tools. I'm the most excited. The thing that gets me the most excited about M&A and AI is going through lengthy documents to identify the key stat, right? So I know what market is. I know what I want the terms to be. I don't want to go through 150 pages to find it. And so, there's tools like Kira systems. One I really am starting to dabble with is Thought River. It's really allows you to synthesize large amounts of data, find out what matters. It gives you the recommendation, but most importantly, it's able to find the key deal points, and then I know what my perspective is on that, and then I can gut check it with what kind of AI thinks. So it's been really cool. But ChatGPT just has so many uses, but there's also a lot of danger. So at the end of the day, I'm always fact checking myself and making sure that I kind of have the final say, and anything I'm putting out there is credible.
Sure.
Yeah, Andrew, I'm glad you mentioned Jasper and content creation. I was actually looking into this recently. I was concerned that, the use of some of these AI tools may be, say, penalized by Google, insofar as people may want to be publishing content that, ranks highly in a search result. Google may not treat it the same, but as far as I've read recently, and again, that may change in real time, even during this conversation, content is content in the eyes of Google. And so just for the acceleration of the production of content alone, I think people need to be experimenting with this. And I've likewise used Jasper.
Yeah, on that, we have an interesting question from one of the attendees, which I'll put forth to all three of you. Is there a risk that LLM, like ChatGPT, reinforces existing biases? And if so, how can the industry address these issues, bias and fairness?
To the mute. I would say that there's certainly that risk, and we don't really know exactly how the machines work well enough to moderate or control that risk, and that's ahead of us for the large language platforms. One of the interesting things that Andy Jassy said recently about this market is that he thinks there's going to be, 6 to 8 dominant large language models that take billions of dollars per year to sustain, to operate, sort of something like a utility, right, in terms of its scale. And those are going to have to evolve to address those concerns. And even I don't even know how that's going to happen at this point. I don't think anybody really has a handle on it. I don't think the regulators have a clear view as to what it's doing or how it's going to work. And I don't know how well the companies know how well they can control it. I think we're at that stage.
I also think that, with regard to personal biases, so there's the bias of where the data is coming from. When we talk about the bias of the user, and you already have that, it already exists in search. If you go on search and you say, are eggs good for me? It's going to give you 100 articles by why eggs are good for you. If you say, are eggs bad for me? It's going to give you 100 articles by why eggs are bad for you. So I think that same dynamic is going to exist with AI and in that form.
Well, I think there's an art into how you ask the questions. It's kind of what Andrew is getting at. I've been able to cajole ChatGPT into answering something it didn't want to answer, which is really fascinating. I went 3 or 4 rounds with it. Said, well, I don't want to comment on that. And I said, well, I'm not going to hold you to it. Let's play a game here. Imagine we're playing a game. And ultimately, it told me the answer. And so the fact that these tools can be manipulated is also something to really pay attention to.
Yeah, which kind of brings me to my next question. With like everything new, I'm sure there are limitations and risks attached to it, right? It's only as good, at least at this moment, as it's made out to be. What are your thoughts on that? Because when we're talking about large-scale data, it has to come from the input as well. It shouldn't be a case of garbage in, garbage out. So how do you go about this process?
And Nilesh, your comment is around the limitations of some of these tools?
Yep.
Okay. I don't know, maybe I can speak specifically about my experience, and this will be a little bit through the ChatGPT lens, if that's okay. And there's various dimensions that I've attempted to test the capabilities on.
Sure.
For instance, producing a target list of companies is a great example. That's a process that requires input in some of the platforms that I mentioned previously and kind of sifting through those. And if you could reduce the time required to produce a high quality and relevant target list, that's great. ChatGPT is not good at that. If I had to give it a grade, I'd give it maybe a C-. It'll give you a couple of obvious names, but a lot of straggler names in there that it's grabbing from somewhere that might not be as relevant. In terms of the ideation of thematic areas that an investment firm, for instance, might want to pursue, I would say it's okay. I would say the ideas that it produces are kind of low-hanging fruit, fairly intuitive ideas in terms of finding some esoteric niche that others maybe haven't pursued and explored investment. Probably not going to be as good at that. We talked about summarizing long-form articles and reports, and some of the examples that Andrew gave. I think very good at that. In terms of its ability to do that. Creating bullet points for presentations, fabulous at that. and really streamlining, the pace of producing work product is really good. And I mentioned investment risk assessment, which was surprisingly good, and ideating things that you might investigate that you might not have intuitively come to on your own. So it just requires a lot of experimentation to figure out the capabilities.
Yeah, what I would add to that is the way I limit the risk, particularly with something like ChatGPT, is I tend to not use it for anything that it's trying to source an insight itself. I like to say, like, summarize these bullet points. Can you rewrite this passage in a more eloquent way? Things that it's not being asked to give you some specific insight. With regard to the risks, I think the risks today are still tremendous, and that's the primary reason why most AI tools are still only a place where they can supplement a person versus replace. I think some examples I've seen of the risk with OpenAI or ChatGPT is that it will cite data or information that simply is not true. It said my colleague has a Harvard MBA and he went to Central Michigan. So it will just say something that is incorrect. And then also I think that with regard to legal document review and making representations and warranties and having things legally binding, there's a significant risk in relying on AI to kind of make a decision on something that's critical to a deal that could have been missed because of a lack of context or deal dynamics. So I think the risks are still very high. I think that it's going to continue to get better. And I also think it'll get better and the risk will be mitigated as some of these tools, I know OpenAI is only as current as kind of through late 2021. So as it becomes real time and it has the latest data, I think the risk will also get mitigated.
Sure.
It's moderately interesting, I guess, that I've been gravitating to Bard more than ChatGPT, and I truly believe that partly because it's trained on data that's more current, but it's not reliable. It's not factually reliable. It will tell you things that are absolutely incorrect. And, it's tremendously useful for things along the lines that Mark and Andrew have highlighted, like highlighting, or summarizing the key points from an earnings call transcript that otherwise you might have to go through in some detail. Even some of the public services like Street Account, which is owned by FactSet, are using it for that purpose. It's like, I hate to put it like this, but it's like somebody who's new on your team that's thoughtful and, but not necessarily experienced, and you can ask them for their thoughts and an initial contribution, and you have to sort of take it from there.
Sure. So, Mark, you talked about the certain areas that OpenAIs like ChatGPT are good at, other areas perhaps not. In such cases, that I'm sure it's going to evolve. How do you find that right balance between data-generated insights and genuine human intuition?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think going back to the risk concept, we all need to be very careful. These tools are very alluring because of the ease with which they produce output. And there's the risk of over-delegating to them, which you don't want to do. I think people have probably seen the headline about some attorneys who cited legal precedents that didn't exist in a court case and were fined subsequently to that. That's the sole data hallucination, concept, which is extremely dangerous. That should be a cautionary tale to anybody who's, tempted to use the output of these tools without, checking it, alongside kind of human intelligence. And so, my advice is use it as a tool, but don't trust but verify, I think would be my advice to everybody.
Sure, understood. Andrew, is that a sentiment that you share?
Yeah, it's exactly the same sentiment. I always do a thorough review and fact check of anything that I'm leveraging. And like I said, my current philosophy is that anything that's going to a third party, is that I'm using AI needs to just be summarizing data that I've input. So one way you can limit your risk as a user to AI is you can literally tell it, hey, I'm going to give you these 10 pieces of information. Do not make any assumptions outside of these 10 pieces of information. and craft whatever you're looking to have maybe your output, but you can block it from even trying to make any assumption outside of what you've told it, which gives you some protection as well.
Right, right. So if I could just summarize the takeaway from this particular bit, use it. I'm sure it's making your life easier, but at the end of the day, you still have to go with some amount of intuition, fact check it, and then proceed.
I would go further and say that the tool wasn't built for the uses that we are now, asking it to provide, and that the development effort at the major players and others to sort of bring it to the next level to do those tasks better is furiously underway and is supported by resources that have rarely been marshaled, from the top to the bottom of the stack at this scale.
Understood. Which kind of provides a good segue into the next section, which is to do with the governance framework and regulation. So far, we've seen regulators play a catch-up role, and we haven't heard too many things coming out when it comes to AI, leave alone the middle private market, but also the public market. But do you, as industry leaders, see regulation catching up as AI's role presumably increases in deal making? Mark, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I don't love the R word regulation, but it's inevitably going to happen. There's going to be issues. I mean, you've seen some highly regulated industries already ban the use of some of these tools internally. Areas like financial services, various telecom companies just won't let their employees use them out of data privacy concerns. It's interesting with, again, tools like a ChatGPT, you can now upload documents into it, but you need to be careful about what the information you're feeding to it, which then becomes part of its, corpus of information. And so I think everybody needs to be very careful, because there's this tendency to play and explore, but just think very carefully about what you are loading into the system. But I also think there's a real opportunity on the investment side of things. Companies that can really, dissect the privacy or legal related issues surrounding the use of AI are going to be extremely well situated. And so looking for people who have that knowledge base and can find ways to commercialize that, I think would be very well situated.
Sure. John, I do know that you have some views on regulation and governance. You see regulators playing a strong role when it comes to this going forward?
What I could add probably that's more interesting than sort of trying to guess what's going to happen in Washington is that we had meetings even before ChatGPT with media companies that were being approached by leaders around the world who were really very concerned that fakes, deep fakes, or AI created content could be used to foment unrest in their countries. It's really unclear as to what the unintended consequences of this technology will be in that kind of context. The rest of it relating to sort of copyright and IP on the one hand, and fair use, and social concerns, I think will evolve over time as the technology becomes more widely deployed. It may, as usual, race off in directions that the regulators didn't anticipate, or legislators, or any of us didn't anticipate, and there will have to be catch up. But this initial next cycle of geopolitical dynamics, I think, will be really important, and it's one of the reasons that the Llama open source AI project is frightening some people, because it goes out there into the world where it's harder to control.
Right, absolutely.
I also think it's a little analogous to something like cryptocurrency, and at some point, the issue becomes who's the body that's supposed to regulate this. In that instance, it was, is this a commodity or is it a security? And ultimately, decisions are having to be made on that front because real life issues are happening that are impacting people, that are impacting companies. And when I think about middle market deals, the same thing's going to happen. You're going to have real issues that show up in transactions, post-close, litigation that may be tied to this. And ultimately, it's going to be who's responsible for regulating what components of this. And it's going to come from real life scenarios in which AI has had an effect on someone or a company, and someone's going to need to determine who's going to regulate it.
Right. And I'm sure the impact is both internal and external, right? You talked about how it's making life easier on certain aspects of deal making, particularly sourcing, which is taking a layer of work away from your existing workforce. There are quite a few things that are getting automated. Given that, the ethical and human considerations, you think governance framework would lean more towards limiting its usage than just letting it run freely?
I think it's very hard to say, and it's going to differ from country to country, and more likely than not, the technology will advance faster than the regulators act. That's just a guess.
Sure. Mark, would you agree with that?
Hard to predict. I agree with that sentiment. I think on some level, it's too soon to know how that's going to unfold. I think my general approach is one towards experimentation and figuring out what works, but I think when real issues emerge, it's going to scare people, and it may create more conservatism. But right now, I'm kind of the mind, I want to figure out what this can do for me, my company, and make life better.
And when I think about us as we're a registered broker dealer, we have to have compliance, so we have regular audits with regard to FINRA. So it's like, does this end up playing into their ethos and them this being a part of your overall compliance? I think that they continually have to evolve with other updates to what's happening in the marketplace, and this is just going to be something else that are they the body or someone else the body, and then what does that look like for other elements of the deal making ecosystem? So it should be interesting, but I think there will be some type of framework. It's just who is responsible for it. I think nobody wants to raise their hand because nobody really understands what it is yet.
Yeah, no, that's fair. And according to you, and let me start with you, John. I'm sure it's impacting the broader economy. Its impact is there across all sectors, but I'm sure there are places, there are areas where the impact is more pronounced versus others. So what, according to you, are the sectors to look out for where AI will have the maximum impact in the coming years?
I think like most new technologies, it's two things you couldn't do before that you can now do because of the advent of the technology, and things that you can do cheaper. And we talked a little bit about the many things you're going to be able to do cheaper that you can automate, like moving data from one platform to another more easily. Similar things that were being done by software like UiPath that's in the public market, but much, much broader. And it'll be, in a way, I think, like the advent of the PC, where you had people typing and you had people with calculators, and then you didn't. But it will be at a much higher level and much more broad, much broader. But then the things that you couldn't do before are in a way more interesting. Like I said, virtual sensors, where the AI can tell you what's happening in places you can't see in a manufacturing line, or protein folding, or there's a bunch of those problems that are really, really hard that AI can help address. And also a very large number of those applications, which is why this is such an exciting transition.
Sure.
Nilesh, there's a sector that I think potentially shows opportunity. I think about this concept of AI preparedness. A lot of companies want to say, okay, let's just do AI. But if they haven't gone through the digital transformation steps to produce the data that's required for AI to act upon, then they're really kind of handicapped at that point. So companies are going to need a lot of support in the area of structuring and organizing their information such that it can be ready to produce actionable AI, insights and get what they really want to get out of it. And so I think there is a real opportunity in that arena. On top of that, AI strategy or implementation and advisory work, shows a lot of promise. Looking for extremely high intellect folks who can help companies lay out a strategy framework to allow them to participate in the AI era. I mentioned previously companies that understand the privacy or legal intricacies, regulatory intricacies we've been talking about of AI are extremely well situated. They're going to be increasingly called upon. And then also companies that are able to attract and benefit from scarce and high-end AI related talent. We've probably seen the headlines of what Netflix is offering people, kind of in their AI division. And it's really indicative of how they're placing value on those capabilities. So the companies that can attract those folks, make good use of them, or find other ways to benefit from that fairly scarce talent right now are going to be extremely well situated.
Yeah. No, I do remember going through that job opening by Netflix, an AI specialist, where they were willing to pay this person a base compensation of anywhere between 300K to 900K. So no, I get your point. Andrew, do you think that areas in the professional services, data analytics, IT consulting, where knowledge, human capital is still the key driving factor, these are the sectors which will perhaps take a lead when it comes to AI, its implementation, and taking advantage of it?
Yeah, I certainly think that that is where you're going to see the biggest gains of business services in particular. But I think that there's going to be a lot of sectors where there's you weigh out human capital versus not. I think the most effective sectors that are leveraging are healthcare, ability to analyze data, images, development of new medicine, e-commerce and retail, be able to get more insights on consumer preferences, predictive analytics, supply chain side, AI for inventory in general. But when I think about the flip side, where is the human capital probably going to outweigh on the business services side? I would say healthcare again, ironically. So it's like, there's patient care that requires empathy, intuition, technical skill. There's on the legal front, there's court appearances, there's human touch, there's context, and I think a lot of the kind of creative industries, HR, strategic planning and consulting, some of those you can't replace with AI over time. So there really is a balance to what it can do. I mean, I could literally give you any industry and I can give you an example. I do a lot in the food space. For example, in agriculture, you're seeing AI-powered drones that are able to monitor and optimize, crop health, soil conditions, things of that nature, and understand what the pest levels are. So, I mean, it really is interesting, but I still think, like we talked about, healthcare, legal, creative, there is going to be a human touch, human element to it that you can't, there's going to be kind of a protective mode on.
Yeah, John, you did talk about this example of scanners, but do you see this extending, let's say, more aggressively into physical asset-heavy sectors, heavy industries?
It seems likely that efforts to do things like automate the construction process, which have been in the course of being embedded in control and monitoring and evaluation of the adherence of construction to the plan, for example, would be a prime example of a place where you would think that AI is going to be of incremental value, as it's going to be in lots of other software application spaces. And then, as in all things, there are complementary technology advances relating to the advent of more sensors, better data, the grooming of that data into a form that can be used by the AI that will contribute to this. It kind of folds into making things autonomous generally, and that seems to be moving broadly across all those layers, from the gathering of the data, the deployment of sensors, the transmitting and grooming of the data, to the real-time analysis necessary to provide feedback to the machines that are executing the physical plan. That's a logical place for this to make an incremental contribution, but it's part of the whole broad technology advance that we're living through.
Sure, understood, understood. I'm just doing a time check here. We're still 10 minutes away from closing this, so I can take a few questions from our attendees. And one of the questions that we have, and I'd like all of you to respond to this, is many firms are often protective and private about their strategies and game plans. Will you be comfortable if a large-scale language model have access to your data in future?
Maybe I'll say I'd be somewhat uncomfortable about that. Are you talking about proprietary data, like internal proprietary data? Is that what we're talking about? Or are we talking about personal information? I guess we don't know. What I would say is, yeah, I'd be a little uncomfortable about that. I mean, speaking at the business level, I think one of the best advantages that companies have in the current era is their data. And so preserving and protecting that at all costs is critical, which is why, in the area where I am very careful is, what I give to ChatGPT. And so, yes, that gives me some amount of unease. As it relates to personal information, obviously there's various dimensions of personal information that would make me uncomfortable. So I hope that answers the question.
Sure. No, we're also obviously referring to business data only, not personal information. But within that, providing, let's say, access to your investment strategy and data. The question alludes more to that than personal.
Yeah, what's interesting about that is I think about a business model like Glassdoor, right? They say, hey, I'll share with you other people's salary information if you share with me your salary information. And that's essentially, hey, if I want to be able to get unleash the power of this tool that I'm going to be using, I need to share. If I'm going to leverage other people's data, I need to participate and share my data. And so it really comes down to the fact of, the value, the risk versus the reward. And I think each company is going to be different. How sophisticated is their data? If you feel like, hey, there's a lot more information out there that you can leverage that can allow you to empower your insights and your activities, and there's not a lot of sensitivity versus, and as well as it's all anonymized and it's kind of just floating in the ethos, but that's not tied directly to your company. I think that makes a big deal. If someone could identify it as you or your data, that's different. But if it's anonymized, there's a lot of factors you have to consider when making that type of decision.
I think in some cases, the shared data will be a public good, and in some cases, it'll be an industry initiative, right, to achieve something that couldn't be achieved unless you shared it. I think BMW, Mercedes, and Audi do something like this with respect to safety data. I mean, I'm not 100% sure. But in other cases, you're really going to want to make sure it's just your data. So if you're a company that's planning a trade promotion and you're trying to figure out what you think the impact of the trade promotion will be on sales, that proves to be a really challenging problem year over year because you've got seasonality that shifts, weather that shifts. And so you're now going to try to really take all your data and do something that a data scientist used to have to do, and presumably the AI pulls in some of the publicly available data, and you have to have some confidence that the rest of it remains confidential. And then you could use the AI to achieve some of the things that previously you really weren't doing very well.
Yeah.
Forecasting being one of the most common.
Sure. No, all valid points. I actually cannot believe that time's just flown by. We're just 5 minutes away from closing this. But before I wrap this up, let me quickly ask all three of our panelists. Andrew, let me start with you. I mean, what's your key takeaway from this?
I think there's a lot of takeaways, but if I were to kind of summarize it, I think one, I think AI is something that can't be ignored, and if you are ignoring it, it'd be like ignoring the internet. I don't think this is a trend or a fad. This is something that's here to stay, and I think companies that aren't embracing it or exploring it or talking about it are gonna fall to the wayside, and their competitors are frankly gonna pass them by. I think it's a tool that we should proceed with caution, and I think that if we do so and we're mindful of that, I think it could be something that increases productivity, helps us reduce cost, And I think one thing we haven't talked about is I think one of the biggest benefits of it is employee engagement and having people work on the things that they find they're passionate about and what they want to do, and kind of distributing the kind of non-interesting tasks to the AI. So ultimately, I think it's those are some of my key takeaways.
Sure, no, valid point, particularly the last one, which we intend to take up in one of our future series. But John, let me come to you. What's your key takeaway?
I guess I'm sort of astonished at the breadth of the movement that's occurring from the bottom of the stack right up through the platform layer into the applications by very, very powerful and well-funded companies and by governments. And so the force of this transition is, I think, unparalleled. I don't think we've ever seen anything take a new technology at this point and press it as hard as it's being pressed right now. And I think, all of the topics that you raised relating to how it's going to be deployed, managed, what the legal implications will be, all that's in front of us. But it seems to be really moving with an incredible amount of force. And so we're going to find out what those implications are.
Sure. Mark, would you agree? And no, let me have a follow-up for you on that. Will AI keep you awake at night?
I guess my co-panelists have summarized this all very well. What I would say in closing is I think there's a tremendous carrot and stick at the individual level and corporate level, as it relates to AI. The carrot, of course, is increased productivity, generating higher ROI in your time, better quality of life, all the things we've talked about. The stick gets to the quote, and we've all probably seen this on LinkedIn at this point. It says you're not going to be replaced by AI, you'll be replaced by somebody using AI. And so it's incumbent upon everybody to understand the capabilities of these tools. And I think it's at our own peril that we don't participate in what's, I think, a tremendous mega trend that we're kind of in the early innings of.
Sure. And Andrew, you did refer to this as one of your key takeaways, but to the other panelists, I mean, what would you like to learn more about this topic? Because like you said, it's here, it's going to stay, and it's going to evolve. But if you were to highlight one or two areas where you'd like to learn more, what would those be?
For me, it's like you say, what keeps me awake at night is I feel like there's so many applications that I'm unaware of, and I'd like to learn more about them and find forums to engage myself, my company, my employees, and that's what I want to understand. Like everything I've learned has either been through osmosis because it's come up on a transaction, or through self-learning. I think there needs to be a better forum to understand all the different applications for AI, what they exist, what their limitations are. So I'd really like to see that for sure.
Very well said. No, thank you so much. Thank you, gentlemen. I would like to thank also our attendees for joining this discussion. If there are any questions that went unanswered, please feel free to reach out to our team, and we will put you in touch with the right person. Once again, I'd like to remind everyone that we will send you a link to replay the recording of this webinar, and there'll be a survey which will pop up on your screens as we close. Thank you once again, and we look forward to welcoming you to our next webinar, where we'll expand further on this topic. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.